Hello, welcome to Faces of the Men's Rights Movement. Today I have good friend and fellow member of NCFM, David Shackleton from Canada. David, how are you?
Okay, got a sore back today, but otherwise I'm fine.
Sorry to hear about that. So we met through the Chicago chapter of the NCFM, where we do the weekly, every Sunday we do the Zoom meetings. I always really enjoy those. And I'm very interested in interviewing you because you are a published author.
Yes, yes, I've got two books. The first is called "The Hand That Rocks the World," and it was an attempt to explain the nature of female social power, because I think that that's poorly understood. You know, the prevailing story is the feminist story, and it essentially says that women have no power, but that's obviously not the case, since women have expressed a great deal of their interests and desires and had the whole world pay attention to them. So they seem to have a lot of power under a banner of victimhood. So that was interesting to me, and I studied it for a long time and finally wrote about it. And the second book was published in 2018. It's called Daughters of Feminism. And it's the stories of 30 women about how they came to realize the fact that men's issues are legitimate as well as women's issues. So it was an attempt to influence the culture by promoting women's voices, because women have a lot more credibility talking about gender these days than men do. And so I thought, well, we'll hear from some women. So that did pretty well, in that it sold several thousand copies,
Oh,
and
wow.
I regularly get checks from Amazon for Germany and England and different places, the USA. So
So
yeah,
you
those
really
are the two
are
books.
you really are a men's rights activist. Sometimes feminists criticize MRAs by saying, well, what do you guys actually do? You have actually done.
Well, I mean, and I've also worked for 3 years for a men's organization. I opened a men's organization in Ottawa as the leader of a project team, and then I was chairman of the board, and then I actually became the executive director for 3 years that was providing services for men, the only organization, the only charitable organization in the city that was providing services focused for men. So many, of course, for women, because they're aware of the needs that women have, and those needs are real. I don't minimize women's issues at all, but
What just
society minimizes men's issues, and so that's what I'm trying to correct.
if I can ask, what are the services?
Oh, there are various kinds of support services and clinical services, support for men around legal issues like false accusations, through family court, emotional support for men who have had various things happen to them, through loss of their families, had false allegations made against them, um, relationship services for men who are struggling to keep their marriages together, or to those kinds of things. And the key thing is that they're offered with a balanced attitude. So they're not just society's notion that whenever a man gets into trouble, it must be something he did wrong. They have some empathy for men as well as accountability. And in introducing those two words, those are the key to my sense of what's gone wrong in our society around identity politics, is that we polarize around accountability and compassion. And so, for example, feminism holds accountability for men without compassion, and compassion for women without accountability. And that's the one-sidedness of it. It's not that women shouldn't have compassion. They should, but they also should be held accountable. And that's what I'm trying to do with my books, for instance.
I want to
And
get to the books.
men should be held accountable, but we should also have compassion for them. So I'm trying to undo the polarization that exists in all of identity politics.
I do want to get to the books, but what's the name of the organization that you have?
The organization that I'm no longer with them, but it's the Canadian Association for Equality that opened the Center for Men in Ottawa.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I remember I did a video. There was, I think it was Toronto, that they tried opening, some men tried opening a men's shelter. No, a men's center. I don't think it was shelter, it was a men's center. And feminists immediately attacked it and criticized the mere existence of it, you know.
Yes,
So
I understand.
let me,
So we don't want men's issues to have legitimacy because that takes women off the pedestal of being the only victims.
so let me ask you to that point. What are some of the reactions that you received, both with the organization and with your books? Let's actually start with, you know, immediate reactions from friends and family and coworkers, people that know you personally, when they find out that you're an MRA, when they find out that you've written these books, when they find out about your work with this organization. What are some of the reactions, good, bad, and in between?
Well, with family, it's discomfort. They don't know quite how to relate to it all. They think I'm a bit obsessed, a bit kooky, with this focus that
I know the
I've
feeling.
taken.
I know the
Yeah.
feeling.
So they don't come out and oppose it, but they don't get it, and they don't really want to. They're not interested in reading extensively about it or anything like that. Friends have tended to be, in the last 30 years that I've been looking into this issue, my friends have tended to not stick around if they didn't align somewhat with that. And so my friends have tended to become focused on more of people who are in line with the message that I'm putting out.
That makes sense.
From the public, this, of course, there's a lot of criticism. There's a lot of pushback, and it takes an interesting form because there's not much interest in actually engaging. There's various kinds of throwaway lines and shaming ideas that are put out, but
Like
very
being,
little actual engagement. Because if there's real engagement, I know how to defend what I believe. I know why I believe it, and I can. So the real engagement doesn't work well for them,
and that's why they'd
so
much
I
rather
don't
just, that's why they'd much rather just call you an incel or call you a misogynist, because it's
Yes.
easier than actually engaging.
Yes, and it's more successful. They can just be morally superior and toss off an insult like that, and nothing actually happens. There's no meeting of minds. There's no actual debate. So it's disappointing, really, that one can't engage seriously around these topics with people who are not already somewhat converted, somewhat aware of the situation.
Do you feel that things are shifting? Do you feel that it's getting better for people who talk about men's issues, especially in the last 2 years?
No, I feel that it's getting worse.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that we are. I think that this is an addictive phenomenon, essentially. I define addiction as where we need something, and if we don't get it, we suffer. So I think that we need to have this polarization. I think that our society is addicted to polarizing these issues because we don't want to examine them seriously. And I think that, like all addictions, it's a disease that progresses towards becomes more, unless it's actually addressed, then it moves towards more and more severe situations. Now we have various things that, happen along the way. There's weather along the way, if you want to say, variations back and forward, but the climate is changing. The climate change in this field is steady. And I think it's heading more and more towards a pretty extreme situation where, and the end point of this will be that we realize the shadow of women, the way we've realized the shadow of men. The dark side of men is on display. We know all about it. It's male violence and the various kinds of economic and abuses that men do in their gender role and have done historically. What we haven't noticed is the dark side of women. And so the dark side of women is manifesting. Feminism is one of the forms of the dark side of women. And the principal form that women's power, the dark side of women's power takes, is the power to shame, to say you're not okay, to take a morally superior position and to put down. And so we're seeing more and more of that in different forms. And I think it'll eventually get to the point where we give our heads a shake and say, what is going on here? This can't be true. We're missing something. And I think at that point, there'll be a tipping point and we'll wake up. But I don't think we're that close to it yet. I think it's going to get quite a lot worse before it gets better.
See,
I've had people say to me for 30 years, oh, things are getting better, it's going to turn around. And it never has. And I don't think there's anything that's really substantial that's changing.
I do think that Canada is definitely worse than the United States when it comes to this, because I do feel a shift, noticeable shift. I publicly identified as an MRA at my most recent place of employment. And I was open about my channel, and it didn't cause any problems. And in fact, the general vibe I got was more or less, I'll say not disagreements. I'll say not. It didn't feel at all like me being an MRA made the situation hostile or uncomfortable. I'm public about it on social media. I'm public about it. I went to a political meetup, and I was public about it and didn't cause any problems at all. So I'm comparing this to 4 or 5 years ago. And granted, 4 or 5 years ago, I was in Los Angeles, which was a significantly more progressive environment. But even on social media platforms like Reddit, I've definitely noticed a positive shift. But at the same time, I do see some pretty horrible stories coming out of Canada. So I do see where you are coming from with that. I guess we'll see how it progresses to that point. Let me ask you, how have you seen the men's movement evolve over time? You say that you've started looking at things like 30 years ago. How have things evolved and progressed since then?
Yeah, I was first involved with, I guess, what you'd call the mythopoetic movement, which is men looking at their own emotional issues, their relationship with their fathers and things like that. So looking inside. And I think that movement, was sort of Robert Bly was associated with that. I don't know if you know much about it, but that did some good work. And then they came up against the next big thing, which is the mother. And I think they went, oh no, we're not going to look at that. The mother is much bigger than the father in the psyche, because the mother was the first relationship we ever had. And so, the mythopoetic kind of stopped. It doesn't doing very much these days. And the men's rights, I think, is caught up on the mother, because, what you see is that most advocates are angry about the way men are being treated and the fact that men's issues are not respected or acknowledged. And the anger, I think, is a problem. it gets in the way of actually being effective in many areas. And so, because it's easily stereotyped and it's easily judged. And it's also, I mean, anger is personal, you know. If there's something, if the world is the way it is, then that's the way it is. How can we best engage with it? So I see anger at the situation in empowering men in a pseudo empowering kind of way to stand up to women, but I don't think it goes deep enough. It goes deep being about anger. It starts being about really grip your own ability as a man to stand and clear and strong in what you believe by anger. And so I think that, you know, what I've seen in this movement has come up again. I think it was very positive and very healthy for a while against the feminine. And I think that it hasn't dealt with that, the strength, the power of the female in society. And that's why I wrote my first book, to name that and to explain just how powerful it is and what we need to do to come to terms with that power, which is just as powerful as men's archetypal gender power.
And I'm going to link the books in the description below, so people can check those out. I agree 100%.
Here's one of them.
Oh, there we go. Fantastic. Thoughts of feminism. So you actually,
That's the second one.
You actually interviewed those 30 women.
No, I didn't interview them. They wrote for me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
They wrote their own stories and I edited them. I was the editor.
Right. Wow. That's wow. Yeah, and that's something a lot of people are surprised about when they enter the men's rights movement, is how gender diverse we are. How many women are in fact part of the men's movement.
Yes.
So I was gonna say I agree with the anger, what you said, because while anger can be justified, it can quickly turn into something that's toxic and certainly something that's not productive and something that gets in the way of progress or meaningful dialogue, which is why I always stress, I'm always trying to say, you know, let's be the ones who rise above that. You know, let's not be the ones who are just anti-feminists and that's all we do, and we're looking to be hostile and get into debates. You know, I always say I don't like having debates with feminists. I like having discussions. You know, I think the way you language something has a big impact. So what were some of the common, in Daughters of Feminism, what were some common elements? What were some of the most common things that these women wrote about in their experiences?
Well, they wrote about having pivotal moments that changed their understanding of gender. Most of them didn't start out as being sensitive to men's issues. They came to that after having bought the feminist story for a while. And so those are very interesting stories. And most of them were stories either of seeing the light side of men through having some important male figures who just didn't fit the stereotypes of patriarchal oppressors and so on, and or having experience with women that in which they saw the dark side of women. They saw the one-sidedness of the analysis and the lack of compassion for men and the lack of accountability for women. So they were, but the actual circumstances, the details varied all over the map. They're very interesting stories. You know, it was a very emotional journey for me because having several of these stories brought me to tears because they were so beautiful in their honoring of men who had been wonderful influences in their lives.
Yeah.
And acknowledging the injustices that have been done to men in the last 50 years since we've had the feminist story basically accepted by the culture entirely.
Yeah, and you talked about some of the negative reactions you've received, but obviously, if you've sold so many copies, you must have got some positive reactions as well. Have you gotten any reactions from people who said that reading your book either changed their minds or was a part of their journey in changing their minds or part of their evolution in how they see the men's movement?
Yes, yes, of course you get those. And those are, I mean, that's the reason you write, because it's a lot of work. But, the reason that you do it is that in the hope that people will find it useful in important ways that will change their perceptions and their understanding. And yes, you get some of those. And those are always wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, this was outstanding. So I'm gonna order those books. I think I'm very interested in reading them. I'm gonna put the link in the description below again. And David, I gotta thank you very much for doing this. This was very, very enjoyable, I gotta say.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it as well.
Okay.
Glad
So
glad you're offering this series. Keep it
yeah,
going.
yeah. And I want to turn it into a documentary. You know, I'm not exactly sure where it's going to go or what it's going to be. The only thing I know for sure is the title is going to be Faces of the MRM. So, or maybe Faces of the Men's Movement. So, anyway, I got to figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the men's rights movement, the focus on rights is unfortunate because it's not just about rights. The fact is, we already accept men's responsibility. Having rights without responsibility is unbalanced. The fact that men focus on their rights is appropriate because we already have men's responsibilities front and center. But that's why I don't call myself actually an MRA. I call myself an equalist.
Right.
And the reason is because I want to embrace both rights and responsibilities for men and for women. And with
Right.
women, they already have their rights. Now we need to focus on their responsibilities. For men, they already have their responsibilities. That's accepted in society. We need to focus on their rights. But naming our movements for a one-sided thing is not a good
And I don't
vision.
think either of us would deny that women do have valid issues, and feminism does have valid points in many, many instances.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's why
Oh, yes.
sometimes.
Most of the issues that feminism has raised are totally valid. They're legitimate.
Yeah, that's why I often use the term. I talk about men's issues rather than
Yes.
men's rights. But anyway, I am going to end this and put it on YouTube because I really can't wait to send it out. Awesome.
All right. Thanks so much.